Hello, my name is Laura Hess, and today I'm going to be talking to you about a lesson that I taught that I evaluated based on the Danielson framework. This lesson was taught to 10th grade honors biology students, and the lesson's focus was on mitosis. So students had already been exposed to background information on mitosis through lecture notes, and during this lesson, students were engaging in an activity where they followed a worksheet that went through the different stages of mitosis and the cell cycle, and they answered questions as well as they drew pictures of the different stages of mitosis. They drew these pictures using neon expo markers, and they drew them directly on the black lab tables. So they got to draw on the entire lab table surface. After the completion of this activity in small groups, as a whole class, we reviewed the worksheet and we addressed any misunderstandings or misconceptions that students had. At the completion of that review, we engaged in a formative assessment quiz type activity where I read out a phase of mitosis, and students had to draw the phase that I was referring to directly on the lab tables, and then their groups would raise their hand when they were finished, and groups could collect points based on how quickly and accurately they drew the stage of the cell cycle. Now, this was just for fun. Students were not earning any points. This was just a fun formative assessment. And then the last part of the lesson was students used microscopes to look at actual cells undergoing different stages of mitosis and identifying those different cells. Now, the lesson I taught used different forms of culturally responsive classroom management. One of the main ones was that I had students working in small groups of 2 to 5 during the whole class. So students were allowed to actively engage socially with their peers throughout the entire class period. It was a collaborative learning process where students were encouraged to use each other as resources. I also allowed for students to work hands-on, that we weren't just doing one form of learning. Students were drawing, students were writing answers. There were multiple styles of learning happening during this lesson. And then lastly, I had the sort of classic activity style worksheet, but then with having the game adding in that level of competitiveness, some students respond very well to that level of competitiveness, and they can become very engaged during that type of lesson. Now, my lesson evaluated based on the Danielson framework. If you look on my screen, you can see I have the evaluation I completed up. So looking at the first domain of planning and preparation, on this domain I gave myself a 3 out of 4, so a proficient. The reason I gave myself a 3 was because I felt that I demonstrated understanding of content knowledge. I relayed the topic to previous topics the students had covered. I put a lot of planning and preparation, and I utilized the school district resources such as the Schoology platform. Students were very engaged during the formative assessment, and allowed students to check their knowledge. The reason I did not feel that I reached a distinguished was because I didn't plan out my time correctly. I had to almost cut the formative assessment time in half in order to get through all that I needed to get through that day. So my planning of time constraints was not quite where it should be in order to get a distinguished. In domain 2 on classroom environment, I also gave myself proficient, a 3 out of 4. This was because you saw a clear respect and caring between myself and the students, and students were, most part, were on task when they transitioned. They transitioned quickly. There wasn't a lot of milling around the room. They were doing it as expected. My only issue I encountered was there was one group who was not engaging in the activity, the original activity, and after pointing out to them that I noticed they weren't engaging, I was asking them what they were doing. After they didn't respond to that and start working, I was really unsure of what to do. So I gave myself a proficient because I was unsure of how to handle student defiance, and that's something that I'd like to work on. In domain 3, instruction, I gave myself a basic, a 2 out of 4. And this is really because there was a lot of misunderstanding between myself and the students in terms of expectations of what the students should be doing. Students at a lot of times needed clarification, had to ask a lot of clarification questions because they were unsure of what I wanted them to do at that time, especially with the lab, with the microscopes. They were unsure of what they should be doing. So with that, I need to work on either how I deliver my instructions or my wording when I deliver those instructions to make sure I have maximum clarity with the students. But aside from that, students were engaged, and I was also providing many different avenues of learning for students to learn the mitosis content. And lastly, the professional responsibilities. I gave myself a 4 for this. Although as a PDS, my professional responsibilities are not as great as they will be next semester, I do feel that I've worked very hard to self-reflect on my teaching as well as attend as many professional development opportunities as possible, such as attending the National Science Teacher Association regional conference last month. And yeah, I think for where I am and was expected of me, I am meeting my professional obligations. My strengths and areas of growth, I talked about a lot of these through the evaluation. I'll just highlight one strength is that I have a positive relationship with my students, and one area of growth is how I deliver my questions and directions to students. Okay, so I'd like to thank you for listening to my presentation, and I hope you have a very good winter break.